performance.
Okay. Save this thing for me to not talk about.
Room.
Just walking into the front door. Circles,
Yeah.
like, oh, a beautiful home.
Yeah.
Like, it just had all the feels. It was wonderful.
Yeah. On a gloomy day.
Yes.
Yeah. Cheer you up.
Yeah, I thought it was cool because my partner had never been to this library, so when we came to the opening, I showed her the old like Google Street View and was like, "See," and she was like mind blown, like just very cool.
Yeah, it's seriously crazy to think that it's just this.
Oh yeah,
So it's so transformative. Good work, y'all.
Well, like an opening day, I'd say like 90% were, and then immediately, because when they got checked out, they start getting filled in.
Yeah.
But so it was so neat how they took every book out of here, and then they went through, you know, to figure out what had not circulated recently, what we would have been getting rid of anyway, what we wanted to keep for here, that we could add new, so the collections people got to use all their skills. And yeah, well, because holy, my goodness, the thing got digitized within a day and a half. And we were like running to get it.
Oh,
And it was like, we looked like. We're like, get them on. Make them up. Yeah.
I heard a lot of people noticed that.
Oh,
you were friends and family.
Oh no.
no.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yes, yeah.
Do we?
We should just ask.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
I think it should
the
be loud.
microphone is actually only for in the room.
Oh,
The
because there's-
overhead is doing
yeah.
it for the online.
So we probably don't need it.
Yeah,
All right.
unless these folks.
Can you all hear us?
Can you
fine?
hear
Hear
us
us.
well?
Yeah.
Thanks for joining in person.
For those online, we'll start in just a minute.
That camera over there. The one, camera. Yeah, that camera, microphones everywhere.
2:30. I usually give a few minutes, but because we have such a tight agenda, I'm gonna just jump in. So I'll
Yeah.
stand. Good afternoon, everyone who online and virtually and in the room at the Midland Library. Thanks for being here. We're here today to talk about the design and engagement of two Multnomah County libraries, the Midland Library, which has been constructed and we're in, and the East County Library, which is currently under construction. The funding for these these projects comes from a bond that was created after voters overwhelmingly approved Measure 26-11 in 2020, just to expand and modernize the county's library system. So we're going to hear about that process of setting up the bond as well as these two projects. So leading us in the presentation today and in the discussion is a panel of really talented folks from Portland's design community and Multnomah County, including Suzanne Chow from community, there's a long list here. Community engagement strategist from Multnomah County Library Capital Bonds Projects, bear with me. Katie Odell here, the Library Capital Building Projects Deputy Director from Multnomah County Library Capital Bond Projects. Jeannie Lai from, she's an architect and interior designer from Bora Architecture and Interiors. Kareem Hassan name Yes, Director, Storyteller and Communications at Colloqate Design, and then Hannah Silver, who's the Inclusive Design Facilitator at Holst Architecture. And so with that, I'm going to turn the reins back over to the panel, and we have a packed agenda, so we're going to ask that you please put your questions in the chat, or for those in the room, to the end, and we'll have time at the end to discuss them. And take it away. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for joining us here, both folks who are in person and who are online. I'm Katie Odell, a longtime librarian and now the Deputy Director for the Library Bond Program. And since we are a bit more intimate group, we too are just curious what you're the most interested in. So we will be covering all of these aspects of our project, but if there's an area where you want to hear more on, we'll try to make time for that, and we'll be available for questions after as well. So just a little bit of background about Multnomah County Library. It's truly a treasured community institute. It's been around since 1864. It's one of the nation's busiest libraries, but it's also one of the smallest for the other comparable libraries of our size. So if you were to go to another urban library system similar to a Portland size, at best we're 1/2 to even 1/3 of their total square footage. So we were historically underbuilt. We're quite, I'd say, successful at our service despite our buildings, and that's something we're now changing for a lot of good reasons. We also, as the library, some things people don't know is we're Oregon's largest provider of free internet access. We have millions of print digital resources in multiple languages, of course, for people of all ages. And from kindergarten readiness to job training, computer assisted design, 3D printing, the library supports all people really in their pursuits of what they want to do to learn and connect. So I mentioned our dearth of space, and one stat that really stood out for us is you could take every single square footage of every Multnomah County library, staff space, or administration space, and it could fit inside Seattle's main downtown library with room left over. So you can imagine how jealous we've been at that library for a long time. But we are changing that. And one of the things we're really focused on too is equity of library spaces across the county. When we did some deep investigative work in 2016, 2017, we realized that while 40% of the population is east of 205, only 24% of our library space was east of 205. And you can see those green dots kind of running up and down the Willamette River, and they get a lot more space in between them when we get to East County. So part of our overall plan was increasing square footage in East County. So just as a quick bond overview, really we had just a couple simple goals in our 2020 bond that was passed by voters. It was more space for people, finding more ways to focus on safety and security, and then shifting to owning rather than renting quite a few of our spaces for long-term sustainability. And so it really, we've also found some ways to make more efficiencies in how we move books around the system. So we now have a very nice organized warehouse of what will be 500,000 books just north of here on 122nd. That's our operations center. And that means that there's more space right around here and the branches for people to gather, for activities like this to happen, and of course for the community to be able to reserve and use these rooms as they like. And so part of that bond was doing expansions and renovations to 7 branch libraries, building an East County library that's going up on Eastman Parkway. If you give a drive by, you'll be amazed at the gorgeous building going in there. It's going to be 95,000 square feet, so similar to Central Library, but right in the core of Gresham. We are also focused on adding gigabit speed internet to all libraries, creating that operations center that's really so valuable to our whole system. And then every other location got a refresh, whether that was new paint and some new carpeting, but lowering shelves and looking for ways to make our buildings just more safe and accessible. And I also just mentioned, we're on our way. We're really on our way. We have this building open at Midland. We just opened Holgate. Next up will be North Portland this winter. And then Albina, which is getting a huge, gorgeous makeover, will open late next spring. So yeah, we wanted to talk about a little bit just about the project setup and really how important the work at the setup was for us in being able to do our community engagement and our community participation in a new and different way. I mean, we've never done such a large building project like this before, but we knew we wanted to have a match between the community being able to direct and give input, and then our new projects and kind of meeting in the middle to figure out how the community can have the most say. To do that though, we had to have early planning meetings. We really had to disrupt what a traditional planning building project might look like. We decided we were gonna find every way we could to really center equity and CE community engagement in our buildings. And one key for that was we created a community engagement strategist position. So we were working with 4 different architecture teams and construction teams. And so, but the community's used to getting kind of, really similar service from all of our system. And so having our community engagement strategist, who happens to be here, it's Suzanne, being able to be the through line who could not only carry the library and the county's values, but our new sort of understanding and engagement that we were learning from side by side with Suzanne, with Bora, with Colloqate, and how that we can highlight the voices of the community and really make it accessible for people who may have traditionally been left out of the conversation before, or who might not be able to come out on a Tuesday night for a meeting. We did a lot of different ways of reaching folks, and she'll talk more about that. And then we also, one thing that was key for us is embedding enough time for CE and CE reflection into each of those phases. I think it was so essential and helpful that the design team came along on every single community engagement effort. Often we're organizing and driving them. So it wasn't something the library was doing and the team just kind of came along and said, okay, yeah. It was very collaborative in working together. And then I think the other I wanted to highlight for you is one of our early documents was our community engagement ethos. And we really created this when we had a lot more ideas than knowledge. A lot more excitement than true expertise, but we wanted to have a real gold standard, a North Star we could look to say, are we doing this? Like, this is what we talk about, this is what we want, this is what we think is important when it comes to the community, but are we actually doing it? So this has guided us since, I think, very early in 2001 when the bond started, and has worked across all of our projects. But for us, it's been a great way to sort of translate what we've been talking about and being able to share that with our partners as well. So I'll just mention for us, the concepts were really around being equitable, transparent, just, accessible, informed, and flexible. Then I'll mention this is our timeline for all of the projects. And what I just wanted to highlight to you here was, boy, I mean, and these have moved and shifted, and as we adjusted, post-COVID to having this big bond program. But what we wanted to highlight for folks to understand is that long bright yellow bar that's at the top. Before we had community engagement really wrapped up in pre-design, and it wasn't really reflecting that our community engagement happened before the bond, during the bond projects, after the bond projects, still happening right now, to ensure that it wasn't only just we were speaking and creating community about a building for one moment, we really want that to last into the future. So that's something we've been highlighting all along as well. But you can see it was a pretty complex schedule, and originally our bond was an 8-year bond, and due to the needs of our bond sales, the requirements, we actually will wrap it up in less than 6. So it's been a very aggressive timeline for sure, which we've all felt. And I think with that, I'm turning you over to Jeannie.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So my name is Jeannie Lai. I'm with Bora Architecture and Interiors. I'm a principal. I led these projects and collaborated with everybody here with Colloqate Design, where Bora is the architect of record. So we're at Midland. Tell you a little bit about the background of this project. So this was a renovation of an existing building and addition. So this half of the building, this area here, that was added, a total of 6,000 square feet was added to a 25,000 square foot building. What was really unique about this site is that it's next to Midland Park, which is right behind us. So we were really excited about that outdoor space potential here. And then a $31 million project total project budget. Next slide, thank you. So this project is on track for a LEED Gold certification. It has, you probably came in and saw there's 3 large new artwork pieces. We collaborated with RAC, the Regional Art Council, for those 3 major works. And then the outdoor space, there's a outdoor porch as well as a large outdoor plaza and outdoor play area in the back as well. So next to the park. Just wanted to mention some of the key features of the library. So this is the 2nd largest library to date. It will be surpassed by East County when that comes in, but it's a big library, and so there's the first sensory room ever for the system. There's a large interactive play area for kids. There is the first play garden, outdoor play garden outside, and then new teen space as well. And then as Katie mentioned, a lot of real focus around gathering, seating area. So there's an interior gathering circle, and then also an exterior conversation circle outside. And then flexible meeting spaces, a lot of demand for community to use spaces like this room that we're in right now. So lots of different sizes of community room. There's a community art gallery, living room space that people can hang out. And then a quiet reading room as well. So lots of really amazing features for the library. And then I'm going to turn it over to Hannah.
And I'm Hannah Silver, and I work at Holst Architecture as the inclusive design facilitator. So I'm in sort of a community engagement and also design integration role, thinking about how everything that we do at Holst can be more accessible and welcoming to everybody with their various needs. I also had an opportunity to work as a consultant to Bora before I was in this role on Colloqate and Midland, and kind of touch in and talk about accessibility, get into kind of the sensory room conversations a little bit. So as mentioned, the East County Library is this really incredible, huge new resource that will be anchoring really the far east edge of the county. It's right next to the Gresham sort of city center town hall space, where you've got a Max stop right adjacent. You can see in this image. It has 2 front doors, so really trying to think about how we welcome people in from all over the community. It's 2 stories, the size of basically 2 football fields. Huge project and engagement process. This also was developed originally in partnership with Ajay Associates. And we are, as mentioned, we've got a ceiling on at the site. It's mass timber. It's really cool. We've got some construction photos coming up. And yeah, let's see what else I've got here. So on the left, we've got a rendering of that finished space, and on the right, you can sort of see in the background, it kind of lightly says the library title, and you can match that. So these are our library champions, who I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. Got another image here showing the interior of the space. So really excited to be able to welcome the community into what we're calling sort of this giant living room space. And it's this 2-story space, daylit from above, with big skylights. And included in this library, not only do we have tons and tons of books, which people definitely mention in our surveys, is where are the books? I need lots of books, but also a maker space, another teen room, 2 sensory rooms, 1 on each floor, lots of flexible meeting spaces, and there's AV studio, huge auditorium. That was kind of the round piece you saw at the exterior. And wow, lots going on there. Children's spaces, another outdoor play space, etc. This is the indoor sort of story time area, also sort of pictured in that construction photo on the right there. Yeah, we'll come back to that. There's plenty to talk about.
Yes, yeah. So we want to just give the overview of setting up the bonds and the projects first, but now we can kind of step into more of the implementation of like, how are we carrying out all of this community engagement work? So as Cassie mentioned earlier, I'm Suzanne Cho, the community engagement strategist on the Multnomah County Library Building Projects team. And I oversee the community engagement work for all of these larger renovation, expansion, and new building projects. And in my role, I'm working with the architects and of course the rest of the program management office team, library staff, and of course community members to make sure that we are engaging community members in a thoughtful and intentional and equitable way to hear their voices to help shape what these new spaces look like. So I'll share a little bit more about how we plan our community engagement work. So one of the early steps that we do, that we've been doing, is figuring out, identifying who are the communities that we want to be centering on our projects. Katie mentioned the community engagement ethos earlier, and those really did drive a lot of our just overall approach to community engagement, where we're trying to prioritize and amplify the voices of folks who are usually left out of public processes. So some of the tools that we used here are like a power analysis map. After you kind of brain dump all of the different, a bunch of different communities and stakeholders that you can think of, starting to map it out in terms of how folks, I guess, traditionally have influence or power, and see where that lies. And then use that based on where folks land to help identify who are the groups that you want to center and what that might look like. So that's kind of on the who front. Then there's the, what is it that we want to hear from community members? So for something like this, where it's a design process, what are the different desired insights that we have, that the architecture teams have for each of our design process phases? And so making sure, here's some examples of what questions might look like for different types of phases as it gets more and more detailed in design. But what's really important is making sure that you're transparent with yourself and of course with community members around what is influenceable. So what we don't want to do is make sure that we're not wasting folks' like time and energy around things that are driven by hard constraints. And so just making sure that we're really clear that we're asking intentional questions that can really be influenced by the input that we're gathering. And then next slide. The how. So once you kind of have what is it that you want to learn from folks during the process, and who is it that you're trying to center, and figuring out what different approaches and avenues and community engagement activities that you want to use. And so here's the different types of activities that we did across our projects in different combinations. So from the classic public meetings to focus groups, surveys, and longer term paid community engagement programs, which Hannah and Kareem will talk about later more. And so next slide. We know that all of these different types of approaches some of them are better for eliciting different types of feedback. So for example, with one-on-one interviews and focus groups, those are usually better to get some more qualitative narrative type. Oh, and we will be sharing the slides after too. Yeah. But yeah. Yeah, so those are good for getting more in-depth information, as you want to make sure that we're using those early on as well. And then things like tabling, where are great for quick touch points with folks and for reaching a lot of people. But you can't get as in-depth with people. But they're really good for spreading awareness and whatnot. And so, yeah, I think there's just a moment here where you're kind of trying to match, what it is that you're trying to understand to who you're trying to reach, because also different communities interact with different approaches, or they have different relationships with like a survey than some other. So there's a piece here where you're trying to match it all and constantly iterating throughout the process as you see how well or not well things are doing. So I'll pass it to Kareem to share an example of one of our engagement activities for Midland.
Yeah, super quick example, but we'll get into more depth. My name's Kareem, Colloqate Design, co-director, community organizer, and other hats. So this is an example of something that I would call like an intermediate level of depth, but with a lot of real impact. And it was only really possible because of the deeper relationships that we were building in community throughout the process. So as you walked in, you may have noticed an etched pattern on the facade of the building. I actually put a little zine unfolded because I ran out of time, but on all the seats. So that gives a little overview of what that pattern meant. This was a workshop where we actually brought different communities of culture together to bring objects that reflected their cultural heritage or stories that were important to them that they wanted to see reflected in the actual architecture of the building. And we, if you go to the next slide, along with sort of just taking that opportunity to describe what the building was doing and where they were in the design process, and specifically what that exercise was going to produce. We then took all of those stories and we interpreted them, synthesized them, looked for these common narratives across all of the patterns that people created. And then we developed this pattern as a sort of reflection of the different stories that people brought to us. And we made these little zines as a learning guide so that when people come to the library and they see this thing, they can actually understand how it was they contributed to it. But we'll go into a lot more depth on other aspects of engagement. Just wanted to share that as like a snapshot. Stories are like the core piece of data that community members bring to us time and again, right? That's how people understand their experiences of place. And so we need to be really thoughtful about how we use that qualitative data and people see it reflected in the outputs.
Thanks, Kareem. And Cassie, before I forget, for folks online, maybe we can, when you share the slides, maybe we can share the PDF of this as well. Awesome, yeah. And so again, we're kind of going through this a little like fairly fast because there's so much that we could say for all of these different things, but we want to give a little snippet for each topic, and then we can have time afterward to dive discuss a little bit more. But we wanted to share some more kind of the nitty-gritty details on the implementation side for the. So I think some of the things that worked for us for reaching the communities that we were trying to center for each of our different projects were working with organizations and people that have trust with specific communities that you're trying to reach. I think that's a big one. A lot of people have different relationships with government. Not all of them are great. And sometimes you'll just kind of get looped up into what their past experiences are. So working with people who have trust in these communities or with these communities, going to where people are already gathering is a big one. We really quickly learned that, public meetings, town halls, they'll get people who are usually come to those types of activities, but often not necessarily folks that we were trying to center. And then the last one is really important. It's just making sure that the activities are mutually beneficial right away. And so in many of the cases when we could, we were providing financial compensation for folks. And I say right away because I think a lot of the times we think, well, the benefit is what we're creating, right? These libraries, but that's not always, I think it's really important to make sure you're providing benefit for their time in that moment, because something happening years from now, or in their eyes, may never happen because of past experiences, that it's not the same.
Books too, like in the photo. We gave books.
Yeah, we gave
tabling
a lot
events,
of free books, which were
amazing.
courtesy of Library Foundation. Yeah, so any types of things. Food can also be a good way to provide compensation. If you're not sure, you can ask. If you're working with a community organization or an individual who knows that community well, ask them what types of compensation might actually be really useful. So I'll pass it to Kareem and Hannah to highlight some of the key programs for Midland and East County Library.
Thank you. Yes, so the approach that Colloqate brought to Midland and Holgate, this team worked with us on both of those libraries, was a community design advocates program. And essentially, it's a group of community members from those stakeholder communities that we identified at the outset as being our primary stakeholders, folks who were disproportionately impacted and historically continuously underrepresented in influence on these types of projects. But who are, going to rely on these spaces to meet really significant needs in their lives. We recruited from those communities, intersectional identities. We're looking for age and gender, race, culture, ability, disability, and within that group, at the outset met with folks weekly for months. We were having dialogue with them about the design process, educating them on what actually happens in these kinds of processes, what kinds of decisions can be influenced when during the different phases, and then working with them to organize their own engagement activities within their communities. As Suzanne noted, relationships are the driver for this kind of work, and trust is essential. People trust people that they know and that they have good relationships with already, whether that's a coworker or someone who's in your faith community, or someone who's an organizer in your community focused on issues that you care about that affect you. And so this group, everything from focus groups to one-on-one conversations, taking people out to bubble tea, hosting online events, hosting in-person events, interpreters, everything that they needed, we did our best to provide. They were, as we noted, paid, and they also had an additional amount of funds that they could use for purchasing materials, or if someone wanted to contract somebody to help them take notes during a meeting, really made that as flexible as possible. If folks wanted to use some of that to provide stipends for people to participate in their own meetings, we accommodated that as well. And we're still in relationship with these folks because the relationships matter beyond opening day. The issues that affect these community members as they intersect with a library project may affect them on a future project that one of us is also working on. And if we have those relationships in a longstanding manner, then we're better equipped to support them and bring them back into those processes in the future. Super quick.
Yeah. And on the next slide, so we also have partnered with folks who are, I wouldn't say representing the community, but we are working instead of with individuals, where Kareem was just describing the CDAs, we worked with what we call the champions, who are actually partner organizations. So we originally had 3 and one had to sort of opt out because their bandwidth changed, but we also paid the organizations $25,000 each to work with us for the long term through the project. And we have a handful of folks from the 2 organizations, Black Economic Collective and then El Programa, both located in East County and really tied into their communities. Got some images here of a focus group on the left at El Programa, and then the EC group. We hosted a teen focus group at the Holst office to sort of, similarly, make sure there's an exchange. It was like an informational experience for the teens who have been working through this sort of STEM or STEAM oriented education series. We showed them our AV setup. We had a couple of our colleagues who are Black designers talk to this group of primarily Black youth about their path to architecture, and just have had this really incredible exchange throughout the process where we're working with the same people, and we are still meeting over Zoom every quarter. We had a site tour that was incredible, and that the follow through has been really important because they are not only meeting with us to learn about where we're at in the process, but they're saying, oh, the community members have asked me this question, like, what should I tell them? Or they were instrumental in recruiting people for focus groups and providing meals and telling us where we should host events to make sure that people felt comfortable. And They've just been really, really instrumental in our process overall. And additionally then on the next slide, so as we've gone through this process, working both with those community members and groups, and then also sort of bringing in just what we know about doing accessible and inclusive engagement, the library brings their own whole sort of say like structure to this process that has been incredible to participate in, because there is a process to review the questions that we're asking at tabling events and at focus groups to make sure that not only is it in accessible language, but it's also appropriate for what we're able to change at that stage of design. Going back to that slide Suzanne showed earlier, the library, the goal is to work at like a 6th grade reading level, is that right? And yeah,
A lot of time we got like 9.
sometimes it's a little higher, but also we're translating materials into 4 additional languages beyond English. We have, for the first time, I hosted a focus group with simultaneous interpretation. Has anybody done that before? I don't know, I can't see people online, but it was, you know, it was really new to me and really interesting. And the participants said it was great. And it was a really incredible opportunity to just sort of experience that there are so many ways that we can make our engagement accessible to people. We really just need to plan in advance, make sure we know what we're getting into. I can get into all sorts of stuff. I think it's I put this image on the slide because this is sort of, I think, a sort of a representation of the challenge of being really accessible, which is that this poster was created to prompt teens to vote on a color palette for the teen space. And it is translated into, it is a total of 5 languages on here. There's a lot of information. Some of the information is about, is really about framing the engagement to make sure that people understand what is changeable, what is not changeable. We're saying we're asking about the design, we're not asking about the services. You know, we can't guarantee that your feedback will be incorporated, those types of things that are really important. And that's been an ongoing conversation. And, you know, I think everybody involved has been very receptive to striking this balance of, wow, how do we make sure we're being really clear with community members, but also not providing too much information. And so this is where we get into this, like, it is a challenge. There's no doubt that, like, we're all still learning too. And some of the feedback we got from the champions was, you know, some of those mailers or whatever the handouts, there's too much information on there. And so we're still trying to figure that all out. I think Suzanne's up.
I think it's, well,
Oh, is this me, Stu? Still? Okay. Another piece of this, just sort of going back to, you know, we mapped the sort of levels of awareness and power of the communities that are involved. And as we were tracking the events we're attending, we were also tracking, you know, are we reaching the people that we intended to reach? So this is just a little spreadsheet. There are so many spreadsheets involved in good community engagement. I think if you're doing that, you're probably already aware of this. Color coding goes a long way. So, you know, it's this iterative process and always cycling back to, like, what were our guiding principles? Who are we intending to connect with?
Yeah. So this slide, I really wanted to touch on this at least briefly because it's very important to me, but also to like doing this process well. But making sure, in this case, it was the design teams, making sure that the design teams are thoroughly documenting the community engagement is in a de-identified manner is really, really important because it helps make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable to what we've heard and not just what we remember hearing or like think we heard, or, you know, you're like sifting through your brain, but actually making sure you have it written down and documented. Partly also to make sure we're clear about what we're interpreting versus what we really did here or there. And so some of the tips that I have here are, you know, noting what engagement activity each comment that you get is from, using quotations for direct quotes, and including the name of the note taker who's making the observation, or if, again, you're paraphrasing something you heard, I usually just throw down my initials next to it too, just to make sure that it's clear that, like, this is what my interpretation and not necessarily the direct, like, word for word. And, you know, it's been really helpful to have everything digitized into one place once you get to analysis, which Reem and Hannah will talk more about later. And also want to share too that just making sure that you have the time and capacity to do all of this work on the documentation front, and then of course on the synthesis front is really, really important. It's very, very, I feel like it's very often overlooked. Next slide. Another thing I want to mention was this idea of the feedback loops with community engagement. So making sure that we're building trust through consistent communication with the people that we're engaging with. And there's kind of two lengths, I guess, of time that I kind of see it. So there's like the immediate feedback loops that you can do, which is something as simple as sharing your notes out after a focus group or something like that with the community members that are there, asking them to review it and make sure that that feels accurate to what they heard and what they shared, and just giving them like some time to do that. And then the long-term loops, which are sharing updates on what's actually happening with their input. So I'll pass to Kareem to share an example of that.
Yes, one little example of that. So I mentioned when we were working with community design advocates, we started out meeting weekly, and we would actually have like 2 time slots each week for people based off of when they were available to get together with us. That's an immediate feedback loop. A longer term feedback loop, after we had synthesized everything from our community engagement that was going to be incorporated into the design process, wanted to create a form of communication that was accessible to folks offline, because that's really important to many of the stakeholder communities. Like, I don't even read all the email listservs that I signed up for on purpose, right? And so we created these posters, which we produced in all of the languages that the library supports. And these were direct mailed out. We worked with the library's data team to figure out what the 2 most common languages spoken within a 1-mile radius of each location were. And we sent an English copy and the other language copies in direct mailers to residents in those neighborhoods. And I've gotten some feedback on people who received these, which we wanted them to be also beautiful and like an artifact of the process, something that people would want to keep, not just information for its own sake. It was a really fun process to work with the library's communications team to make something that they felt excited about getting out there too. And then digital copies that people could access online as well, and get printed in their own language if they didn't receive one in the mail. So that's an example of longer term, which also included some details about specific engagement processes and how they resulted in the outcomes of the buildings, so people can see their voices reflected again.
Quick time check. We're halfway through.
Got it. Thank you. I'll jump into our incorporating community feedback. A spreadsheet. We use a lot of spreadsheets as noted. So as I mentioned kind of earlier, we're dealing with a lot of qualitative data, which really means we're dealing with stories that people give to us, trusting that we're going to do something with that information. But we don't always get to contain what kinds of communication people give to us, right? Like, we can know what we want out of it going in, but we also have to receive what people give to us and understand what the implications are across the board for our work. And so, of course, we're looking for stories, narratives that emerge over time, seeing how those different narratives connect to different stakeholder communities. Some of those themes could be, for example, in this project around identity and culture and belonging in the library, or around safety and security, or connections to the outdoors. Delight, what makes a delightful experience? Accessing resources, things along those lines. And there are implications that, as a team of designers, spatial designers, are most apparent to us. Those are the spatial implications. Like, what does the space look like? What does it feel like? What are the resources that need to be contained in that space? But then there are also implications beyond that. And this is an opportunity for the systems that are procuring this kind of engagement to get more data to use in other ways that maybe might be implementable directly in the design process itself. And that could be things around programming. So if there is information about programs that would support the use of space that community is articulating, we can bring that to the team, and it can be distributed within the library system or any client system. But also similarly, policy implications. So Colloqate is a design justice practice, which means we approach our work through a lens of racial, cultural, environmental justice, social justice. And we know that the rules that regulate how people use spatial resources historically and continue to this day to not necessarily be equitable or just. So if there's a way to design a beautiful building and also adjust policies to make the uses that people are advocating for more equitable in terms of how people access those spaces, we should consider that. There can be some friction or some tension there, right? But again, that's a gift. We are getting information that can help us guide decision making, and we can share examples of what that has shown up as in the libraries themselves. The next slide just shows a little example, a snapshot of our engagement implications report and our synthesis process. So also trying to make reports not just be something that gets put on a shelf once the project is done or after a project phase, but actually a working tool. You can see how the narratives start to stack up, how different themes start to emerge within those narratives, and each of those are things that we talked about as a team with the library staff and PMO. But then we actually highlighted decision points within each of those types of implications, spatial, programmatic, and policy. And we said, is this a decision that we can make movement on? Here's the proposal coming from the community. Yes or no? Clarity is kindness, as they say. Is it something that could be considered for the future, if not this project? So all of this data, it doesn't necessarily mean that every decision is going to be made based off of what we hear from the community, but it does mean that we can consider each of these things. And if there's someone within the system who does have the agency to be able to take something and run with it, that information can be shared with them too. I think I will hand it to Hannah to talk about.
Just more spreadsheets, but I'll quickly say, our process on ECL, we have over 10,000 comments individually from various engagement events, tabling, we have people with a paper with the question at the top, they write down every single answer they get, I typed it up or somebody else typed it up, wrote down who said it, when was it, et cetera. Accessibility survey where we had like 350 responses with a whole bunch of questions. So it generated a lot of data. I needed to see this another way to be able to actually think about, so what do we do with that? And I will just say, because I wasn't on the project day one, but I joined fairly early on, and then my colleague Shannon has been on the project basically the entire time. Between the two of us, we have each read, I would say, every single comment at least once. So it's not enough to just have it in your brain. I started doing this process of being like, I need to flag this because this has a design implication. There were a lot of things where someone said like, I want a picture of Bugs Bunny on the wall, and nice, but it's not gonna translate into the core design implications. So I started to do that in a new spreadsheet, and I've summarized, I started flagging things as already heard this, already heard this, already heard this. And then I just have one comment to myself. This is on the right where I'm actually tracking with the design team, and we're reviewing it very regularly. And when I get an update from the elevator sub-consultant, I update it to say, yes, the doors will make a sound when they close, so when you arrive at your level or whatnot, just to make sure that we actually have something to track. And that has been, I think maybe in different processes, there's an engagement team that is separate from the design team, which can sort of complicate this flow of the process of sort of being there, hearing from the person to comment, making sure it's tracked, and then knowing who to tell on the design team to make that actually get, incorporated in its whole process, and having someone sort of tracking it. So spreadsheets, keeping an eye on things.
to that note, I'll just add like the amount of labor and like thoughtfulness that needs to go into reading all these comments, like even the amount of emotional labor that goes into like hearing people's experiences of trauma, interacting with systems that, you know, we're working in and trying to make more just and equitable. That's a lot more work than design firms or professionals within client groups may be used to. It may not be in the job description right now. It is the right thing to do. And noting that, I'm noting that to say, even within our practices, it can be difficult to like make sure the information gets carried over from the folks who are doing engagement to the folks who are like mostly focused on drawings. So it requires like us boosting our internal communication practices, which we can always learn and we're always refining. I just wanted to share that, like, whether you have an external consultant or internal team member, it's still a lot of work and it's different muscles that we don't always exercise. But other ways that we can show this information and get it to the broader design team. So this is like an architectural diagram. It's not the most glamorous image, but this is one way that we can actually directly connect community commentary or stakeholder commentary into a visual language that is more accessible to folks who are working in the design industry. I wouldn't say give an axon or a floor plan to community members. Most folks aren't trained to read those things, but we actually produced like construction documentation sets that included coded community commentary around, we're doing this because of this set of narratives that came from our engagement process. That then gets put into the permanent record in a different way. Future contractors may go back and look at that documentation set as they work on these buildings again for repairs or, you know, whatever the case may be. So as many angles as we can come at it for all the different folks who are working on these projects, where we're embedding community voice and stakeholder needs within these sets of documents, the better. And we're gonna blast through the next few slides because they're really just pretty pictures. But the point of these pretty pictures is every single one of these design elements, and within these images, it's like spot all of the things. Like every aspect of these buildings was designed in response to community commentary, to the end users' needs and the staff's needs as well, the people who work here, the people who, again, ultimately are most impacted by how these libraries look, feel, and function. So you can see some of the comments on here, and you can go to that. Yeah, we're on the last one. Yeah. So ask me questions now or later.
Oh yeah, I've got an axon as well, but I should have put some of my annotated renderings because we also have, I think Kareem has the same for all the projects. We have these just call outs to be able to connect the actual words of community members or requests with what's happening there. And they can get used to when the library opens and people walk around or roll around and look at stuff.
And I'll just note that the way we these visuals are something that we've been learning from the early projects that we've been trying to iterate on through the later projects in terms of how we want to share these out in a more digestible way. Okay, so I know we have this last section. We'll go through it really quick because
There hasn't been a lot of any questions in the chat.
online. Okay, I'd still love to like save at least 10 minutes, which is now, for discussion. So the main things that we want to share with evaluation, we're still in the process of evaluating. And so the main things that we have are, I think there's kind of two phases of evaluating success for community engagement. There's how was the process? How did that go? And how was that done? And then what are the actual project outcomes? Since we just opened Holgate and Midland, we're still kind of working on the project outcome side, but we have some numbers that we're sharing around the process side that we can share. So next slide. So for Midland, you know, we have numbers related to reach for the different community engagement avenues that we did, how many we did, you know, how many people did that reach. For Midland, it was during the pandemic, so it's pretty, so I think we really relied on our CDA program and working with the CDAs, which was helpful. Next slide.
I'm not going to read all the quotes, but these are some of the quotes from CDAs who participated in the program.
About the process.
Yeah, folks appreciated the agency that they were that their agency was honored, I guess I would say. We don't give people agency, we just choose whether to honor it or not. And that was.
This is a quick look at just how many people we reached and what modes we used to reach them. Pretty astounding. And at some point I had looked at what is the population of East County and what percent. I mean, it was a very, very small percentage of the population, but still impressive in the reach. And then on the next slide, we just have a little map that shows how we reached across the community to really make sure that we were connecting with folks all over. And I think we did a great job. A lot of tabling events. And we're still in the process with our champions and getting to chat with them regularly and see the process of the building together, which has been so cool to wander around the site with them and see them react to, oh my gosh, we were talking about this in the early stages and now it's this real auditorium space, and it's pretty amazing. That's it.
Yeah, and then like I mentioned, on the project outcome side, we're still kind of working through that, but we're putting together a survey now for the CDAs now that Colloqate and Midland are open, and we'll probably use that as like a basis for how we do some assessment on post-opening with all of our different community members for each of our projects. Okay, yeah, next slide, and questions, discussion time. We have some prompts here if there are no questions, but maybe we can start with any.
Well, we did have a question come in via email.
Email, okay.
Yeah, this person couldn't make it, but they had a question. So that's great. It's Steve. One thing I would love for the group to share are lessons learned they have learned regarding community engagement, especially when it comes to access to opportunity for all residents. They've been able to achieve they have been able to achieve the contracting equity, but wonder where our communities end up. With every library they build or rehabilitate, the program brings opportunities to local businesses and communities.
This maybe more around the COVID, like.
It sounded like they understood, you know.
It's Anna Brophy. She's a member of the board, the bond committee.
It's on the BOC.
Yeah.
Well, I think through viewing and what you guys have just heard, you can kind of see the different ways we've reached and then checked to see who we were reaching and not reaching. And that was very experimental and iterative. And I think, I guess the lesson learned, we went in it hoping to learn from everyone who came to the table. And the truth is we learned from everyone who came to the table. And while they impacted the buildings, I'm really excited about the long-term impact of the power of community engagement for the library beyond our buildings as well. It was something we were trying, but we really didn't have a discipline in, like really the understanding of anything around our documentation or our tagging, things like that. So yeah, I think that is really hopeful for how the library can approach lots of other projects or even just prioritization of services as these new buildings get used.
Add to that.
Oh, please.
So one thing that brings to mind for me in terms of like identifying gaps, right? Like who did we not reach? So when we were first recruiting for our CDA cohort, we created a public application process, worked with the library and the bond management team to create the criteria and the questions and make sure that we were aligned around the right communities that needed to be represented. We didn't get responses from every community that we were trying to reach in that open call, but because every system, every institution has people who have relationships in these communities, you just have to like talk to them. We went to staff working in the libraries. So for example, we didn't have anyone apply from like East African immigrant communities or indigenous communities, indigenous to this land that we're on currently. We also didn't have anyone currently experiencing houselessness or who had worked with unhoused folks as a service provider. But we connected with folks internal to the library system. We're like, oh, I would do direct outreach to this organization. Oh, I know someone who can make a recommendation. Oh, you know, da 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 da. Here's a partner organization we've worked with in the past. Try them, and then we were able to do direct recruitment. So, you know, being nimble and adjusting. Similarly, on that note, like relying on the incredible power that you have within your existing staffing and teams, library staff from the We Speak Your Language programs and folks who were working within the libraries already were like, this shopping center is a place where everyone from my community shows up. This event is happening at this time of year. Y'all should have a table there. We're already going to be there. So like, how do we kind of take advantage of the existing opportunities or spaces where your teams are already interfacing with community members from prioritized communities? It's really a lot of like talking to each other internally to make sure that we're filling those gaps, not just relying on like an initial outreach approach and then you get what you get.
Hi, I'm Max Katz. I'm a capital project manager with Portland Parks and Recreation, and I'm also an architect, just dormant right now. But that was a great presentation, and I'm just so impressed and blown away by the work. And you know, when you talk about inclusive design, there's so many ways to approach it, right? From like the institutional perspective, programming and staffing wise, so that you know staff actually looks like the people you know that that you're serving, the communities that you're serving, and the programs that you offer are also you know culturally specific. And then from the design side, like what can you actually accomplish from design to kind of translate and connect those dots. And I just applaud what you've been able to accomplish because you know folks can say circles are important in our culture and they we want to see that represented, but it's beautiful like what you've created. So I think it's a testament to really listening and being thoughtful, but at the same time you know leaning into your craft and producing something that you know is still amazing and you know is beautiful in the end. I did have a question about you know the process of community engagement and when the feedback was influencing the design. So before you even got to like schematic design or programming, were you engaging community at that point and kind of getting an understanding of programming so that you could kind of begin to scope it out internally and figure out like, all right, what's the budget for this, or where's the programming for this going to go? And then during the design process, how much change you know happened, or what was kind of the transformations that occurred?
Yeah, I can share a little bit. I think before the bond project started, Katie can dig into this a little more, but there was already a lot of engagement before going into the bond. So there was a lot of feedback about making more spaces for people and balancing that with books. So when Bora started and Colloqate started on Holgate and Midland, we already kind of understood that we need to rebalance the space, the area, so that there could be more seating, so that you can have a gathering circle or a living room space, right? Like those have to be done really early. So that was something that we did a ratio based on studies of existing and other library types and kind of benchmarked to kind of come up with that early on. So those kind of quantitative, like there's qualitative and quantitative numbers, right? Like the numbers you kind of have to do early so that and then we got really detailed into look and feel. What are people looking for? What are the features? And then you can, use that space differently, right? Those numbers, you can use them the way that the community, is telling us what they need or want. So the process was very continuous. I think Colloqate and Bora, they would hear something and then, that feedback would be given. And I think that also takes time. Like what I've learned is sort of like having to plan an event takes a lot of time, and then doing the event and then afterwards, all of the processing, that takes a lot of time. And then for the architecture team, we're like, we have deadlines and we're like trying to so I think really syncing that, and it took us a little while to kind of sync up our processes together, so that we're like, okay, well, we drew this, and then we'd hand over and they would go out and see what people felt about it. But I think we had pretty good early on, some basic things that we knew.
Yeah, we did
That
do some
helped.
early survey, like public surveys that have a lot of some qualitative information for ECL too, but I think for chapter 1 as well, but the timing was a little, like like Jeannie mentioned, we had to learn how to be like better on that timing to make sure that it matched up with the cycles too of design decisions and things like that. But for ECL, I think we did a pretty good survey, and that helped influence some of the percentage space of what types of activities we wanted. They wanted to like how much percentage to give to the different types of spaces and such. Maybe not a ton, because we already knew that we wanted those spaces, but a little bit, yeah, for early on at least.
We just had like a chunk for seating, but we didn't know that there would be a gathering circle, like we didn't know that until it actually came through,
Yeah,
so things like that.
no, I think it's great because, it's like, you can't promise the farm, right? First day, but then not really have an understanding of what you can actually afford and accomplish and deliver, so.
I think one good example of that is if we had an endless amount of money, we probably would have put in some kind of like gorgeous commercial kitchen for people to be able to use, because there's a couple libraries doing that so well. But we didn't have an endless supply, and we also didn't have the resources to keep it going. But instead we found a portable cooking cart that we can bring out and bring back, not quite as deluxe, but you can still make some really good food on it and have some demos, and people can share with each other their food, their culture. And so we're able to find ways to get it, even if we couldn't do it, to the nth degree.
Yeah.
And that is kind of core to engagement and design integration too, is to understand the intent and the need, and then the design team working with the development and client team need to understand what the constraints are, and so how you can achieve the need or meet the need. Because again, yeah, it's like a kid tells you, I want this kind of beanbag chair. What's
A merry-go-round.
a merry-go-round, a slide instead of stairs. I love that one. And, I sort of have to mark it as like, well, not incorporated, but, like people are looking for playfulness. People are looking for, what is it that they're trying to achieve out of that? And the hope is that your team is, being really thoughtful and reviewing those and trying to understand, if you have the opportunity, asking for further understanding when it's in a conversation. But really it's like, yeah, the community is not supposed to tell you the design solution. They're supposed to tell you the need, and that's where we work together and sort of.
Or the experience they're looking for.
Yeah.
Not the literal thing maybe, but the experience they're looking for.
Although I will say, if you ever have the opportunity to incorporate a kitchen space, like every project I've worked on, communities of color and culture are asking for kitchen spaces that they can work in. Food is so central to so many ways that people gather and pass on heritage. So I gotta make that plug, because
Food is always,
I'm just gonna say, we are over time. I'm just having trouble. I didn't want to break the conversation because it was really good. But for those of you that are still with us, thank you for joining us. But thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. I know I'm like the voice in the back of your ear. Thank you so much, all 5 of you, for your time and your work on this and your presentation. I can't believe so those couldn't make it today to watch it. So and to share all the materials. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really just had our library foundation and potential donors walk by. Look at us using this space.